Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Malinda Smith, and I'm the Vice-Provost of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Calgary. It is my honor to welcome you to the 2021 Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Awards, which annually are held during the University of Calgary's EDI Week. While this is certainly a change from our usual format, I am delighted that in these COVID times, we can still come together, even virtually, to celebrate the incredible contributions of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Award winners. Before we begin the program, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in Southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Pigoni, and the Guinea First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nations and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, the Bearpaw, and the Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Reg Crowshoe, a member of the University of Calgary Senate and a prominent cultural and spiritual leader here. He is also from the Pigoni First Nations in Southern Alberta. Dr. Crowshoe has a long-standing relationship with the University of Calgary and has generously shared his ceremonial leadership and traditional knowledge with our campus. Before he speaks, Dr. Crowshoe, I would like to honor you with this gift of tobacco, which we will have sent to your home.
Okay, I just want to acknowledge the gift of tobacco.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Crowshoe. What I'd like to do now is invite Dr. Crowshoe to offer a blessing at our event.
I'll light my smudge. We're a verbal society, and we used oral practices for our celebrations and gatherings and discussions. So from the Blackfeet, we use sweetgrass to acknowledge our gathering, to open up our gatherings. And the sweetgrass represents what we call Gimmapipitsin. And translation to that is sanctified kindness for all. So I'm gonna light up the smudge and open up our celebration and the awards but before I do that, I just want to say I'm from the Picani First Nation. I speak the Blackfoot language, and in our creation stories, we listen to what our ancestors left us with creation stories. And one of the stories, and I always remember this, was a story of creation. When creation talked about everything being created, the animals, the plants, and the environment, and all human beings, and the air and the wind, that was all created equal. And in our understanding, the Creator told us we're all equal. So in our understanding, that's a natural law that allows us to look at how we work with inclusion and diversity, because everything is included in that sanctified kindness through the sweetgrass. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge Ed this morning, and Nipo Makinskaki, Drew. It's good to see her this morning also, and our guest speaker, Verna. So I'll start your celebration with our traditional smudge or our traditional call to order. Oh, kishipata pia. Ayo napi natos. Oh, kiteds kachimata kishkanotani. Ayo spumusam stikshi. It's Chimakakia Nakachimo's Kachtamosa. Oh, caps, Sitoki, do Pachimo's caps, Sitoki, Nikmakon Stapichisa. Akuchina Kachinicanica, Achinixin. Need to need Hanaskunatap, so much it's cheap and the Ujichkunataps. I on Nakuna Kimuchis, Binanis to Patapio. Oh, Kanaki Kimatomanik ni Patapiox, Naxi Patapiox. Kimba pipitsin. Ayos pamusawan kakapeni sotoya in Christikui. O kap soto kya kdok pachimuiska na nipo makinska kiwan ka adaga nakota chip sa o kispamusis chipatipio. Ayo kakpo achimuiska ni kamuta nesta wachima aksipatapio. Sinanyay. Thank you very much, and I pass it back to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crowshoe, for your blessing as we celebrate these 2021 Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Awards. Today's celebration will include unveiling those who are making a significant contribution to expanding accessibility, equity, diversity, and inclusion on campus. It will also feature a keynote address from renowned education scholar, Dr. Verna St. Denis, who most recently has been appointed Special Advisor to the President on Anti-Racism and Anti-Oppression at the University of Saskatchewan. Started in 2009, the awards have been created to recognize and celebrate inspiring students, faculty, and staff who are working to advance a more accessible, equitable, diverse, and inclusive university. This is my first year being part of these awards as the new Vice Provost, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Dr. Drew Marshall, the Provost and Vice President Academic, who has been instrumental in establishing my role and the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Thank you, Dr. Marshall, for this bold vision, and to all of our senior leadership. I'd like to start by recognizing the membership of the committee who did the hard work of reviewing applications for the 2021 EDI Awards, and especially to thank Dr. William Yimbo for chairing that committee. The task of deciding this year's winners was not easy. The committee had to make hard decisions from exceptional applications, and we appreciate the time and the care that went into these decisions. I would like to take this moment to thank all the applicants who did submit and recognize the people they nominated for all the amazing work they are doing, they have been doing, and likely will continue to do. I understand you didn't make it easy to pick just one winner. I would also like to acknowledge members of the university's executive leadership team who are joining us virtually, President Ed McCauley and Provost and Vice President Academic, Dr. Drew Marshall. They will be assisting us today in announcing the winners of our 2021 EDI Awards. Lastly, but not least, thank you to the staff in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Provost's Office who ensure programs like today's run smoothly, and to the advancement team for their superb support with today's virtual ceremony. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our university's President and Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Ed McCauley, to provide greetings on behalf of the University of Calgary and to share the importance of our EDI award. Dr. McCauley.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. To start, I want to highlight how delighted we are to welcome you to our university family as the first Vice Provost Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'd also like to join you in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Verna St, and all of the students, faculty, staff, and alumni, as well as our community members that are here with us online. Most importantly, I want to congratulate the winners of the 2021 Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Awards. Achieving true equity means that we need to translate our principles into meaningful action and change. You've shown this, and we're tremendously proud of the impact that you've created, not only here at our university, but also in the wider community too. This is important as an institution. This year's EDI Week takes place at a special milestone because it marks the beginning of Black History Month and the 4th anniversary since this month was officially recognized in Alberta. Black History Month provides an invaluable opportunity to reflect on the stories of changemakers like Violet King, Vernetta Anderson, John Ware, and many, many others who played pivotal roles in building up our city and our province. On a personal note, I'm incredibly proud to see all of the activities taking place at our university to shine a light on these stories. There's been leadership from the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, numerous faculties, student associations, and other community members to take this up, take this important role up. I think these examples, combined with ongoing efforts to advance EDI, speaks to a larger pattern of leadership that defines the University of Calgary's students, faculty, staff, and alumni. We all have a role to play in making sure that equity, diversity, and inclusion are reflected in our research, in our student experience, and in the respectful reciprocal partnerships that we build with communities. When we make EDI a priority, there are clear benefits to the quality of teaching, learning, and research here at our university. But there's a ripple effect in the surrounding community as well. This is leadership that resonates, and it's being recognized. Multiple years in a row now, the University of Calgary has been named as one of Canada's top diversity employers. We were also selected as one of just 17 Canadian universities to take part in a pilot for the Dimensions program on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Canada. This is an initiative to transform our research communities for the better. Another great example is the Courage Conversation series led through the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. More than 2,000 people have taken part in these discussions, joining us from communities all over the world, including the UK, Australia, and the US, and many, many others. And then there's the ongoing championship of so many of our students, including those we're recognizing today, to remove barriers and support the equitable inclusion of Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities in all aspects of our society. When we talk about wicked problems, those pervasive and urgent issues like systemic racism that challenge our collective future, it's these young leaders who are building a path forward with hope, courage, and persistence. The University of Calgary's leadership is being recognized, and it's thanks to a combined effort from many contributors. In particular, I want to give a special shout out to Doctors Malinda Smith and Michael Hart and their teams for the remarkable work that they do every day on our behalf. To our Provost, Dr. Drew Marshall, for her championship of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And as well, to our EDI award recipients, thank you for showing such initiative in advancing positive change. And to all of you joining us online, thank you for your support, your encouragement, and your leadership. We still have a lot of ground to cover on this journey, but I have every confidence that we will go far together. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, President McCauley, for those thoughtful words and also for your leadership in promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion on our campus. Having a commitment from all of our leaders is a key step in making meaningful change. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Marshall, Provost and Vice President Academic at the University of Calgary, who will say a few words and share with us the winner of the first award. Dr. Marshall.
Thanks very much, Malinda, for those words of introduction. And I want to thank Reg for the blessing and for reminding us of that wonderful concept of sanctified kindness. What an important concept for us to be talking about today of all days. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I so wish we could be gathered in person like we normally would do, but I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and that you're taking care of yourselves and each other. These awards are so important as they recognize people who are willing to say and do the right and difficult things, to speak truth to power, often in the face of great adversity. I'd like to start by saying we admire your courage to simply make us a better institution. You know, lots of people ask me, why do we have an EDI week at the University of Calgary? On the one hand, one could argue it's to bring attention to issues of discrimination, harassment, and bullying on our campus, which we do know exists. And of course, those behaviors are unacceptable, and we're working hard to correct them. On the other hand, and perhaps taking a more positive approach, we offer these types of initiatives to bring attention to why equity, diversity, and inclusion matters. To me, this is an issue of potential. Think about the potential of our community right now. Over 35,000 students, about 450 postdocs, over 1,800 academic staff, just over 3,200 non-academic staff, in total, a community of 40,000 people here at the University of Calgary, each filled with individual potential. Imagine if we created an environment where everybody was allowed and encouraged to reach their own potential, to flourish. What would we create individually and collectively if we had that kind of environment? And if we want people to flourish, we must commit to an equitable, diverse, and inclusive campus. It means we must all strive to make the University of Calgary a place free from harassment, bullying, and discrimination. But, you know, frankly, we need to go beyond that. And our award winners today demonstrate the courage that's required for the work we have ahead of us. As a collective, we cannot just speak about anti-racism, we need to speak about racial justice. And we can't just speak out against gender discrimination. We have to speak about justice, fairness, and parity. And we are for diversity because it simply makes us better. Diverse faculty, staff, students, and alumni bring multiple points of view to issues, enhancing creativity and innovative thinking. As a result, we enrich our teaching, learning, and research experiences of the entire campus. Diversity of voices offers broader perspectives, deeper and more meaningful conversation, and results in better decisions. And quite frankly, morally and ethically, treating people in a fair, just, and inclusive way is just the right thing to do. At the University of Calgary, we've taken many steps forward in our EDI efforts in recent years. The first goal, for example, of our international strategy in 2013 was to increase cultural diversity, not to make money. Many lessons related to equity and inclusion were learned through the development of our Indigenous strategy, Itapatope. Through our mental health strategy, we've worked to develop an inclusive campus, one where everyone can flourish. The Women's Resource Center has provided excellent leadership on gender diversity, and our Faith and Spirituality Center has helped to broaden views with initiatives like the Kaleidoscope Project. We've completed 2 salary equity reviews. We've raised the Pride flag on campus. We've painted the quad steps to celebrate Pride, and as an institution have been an active participant in the Pride Parade. In fact, they've had to make new rules to limit the number of participants from our institution because so many people wanted to walk. We've also observed the Transgender Day of Remembrance. That flag ceremony was incredibly moving this past year. And with the terrific work of the Taylor Institute staff, we've worked towards an equitable and inclusive classroom experience. In all of these, we've attempted to make the campus more welcoming and inclusive for all. We also recently restructured the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Protected Disclosure and created the Office of EDI within the Office of the Provost. We hired our inaugural Vice Provost of EDI, Dr. Malinda Smith, a distinguished scholar of political science and a renowned EDI scholar in Canada. The plans for this office are so exciting, some of which you'll see unveiled over the next 2 months, when we publish an important baseline EDI report for the campus. Again, we've done a fair bit, but we still have more work to do. Through our Office of EDI, in conjunction with our university-wide policies and practices, we are committed to removing barriers that have been and continue to be encountered by equity-deserving groups, including women, Indigenous peoples, visible racialized minorities, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQ+. We've taken some big steps and also made important smaller steps, like having non-binary options on our forums and the ability to choose a preferred name for D2L and email. While these seem easy to some, they're so important for many individuals in our community, especially those in the transgender community. All of the changes, big and small, are meant to make our campus more welcoming and inclusive. For the 3rd year in a row, the EDI Awards are recognizing outstanding achievements and activities that foster equitable, sustainable, and measurable change for those who traditionally have been underrepresented on campus. I want to thank all of the individuals and teams working collaboratively to foster diversity on campus. Our EDI plans and strategies are not about integration or assimilation. We do not make the kinds of changes we've made because we find comfort in being the same, but rather because we find inspiration in being different. And we strive to create an inclusive campus where everyone can achieve their potential. We'll only make significant inroads when champions, like the ones we honor today, force change, and when we work as a collective to make change. I have been honored to be part of the change in our campus over the past decade, and I look forward to watching what happens next. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to recognizing the important work that is being done on equity, diversity, and inclusion on campus. And now I have the opportunity to announce the first award winner for the 2021 EDI Awards. The winner of this year's Student Award goes to Keisha Holloman Dawson. Keisha is the president of the University of Calgary Black Law Students Association. This past summer, Keisha took the lead in developing the association's calls to action addressing systemic racism in law, which includes strategies for addressing the underrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people of color in the Calgary Law School and the legal profession, as well as issues of discrimination against BIPOC individuals. Recognizing the barriers, stereotypes, and discrimination that are faced by BIPOC law students, the calls to action offer several strategies for dealing with underlying issues. These include encouraging more diverse applicants through our admissions reform, providing mentorship opportunities to BIPOC students, targeted mental health supports, and incorporating a more diverse faculty. In all she does, Keisha takes an evidence-based approach and cultivates respectful and collaborative relationships, thereby achieving buy-in for her goals, the true definition of leadership on EDI issues. Congratulations, Keisha, on winning this year's EDI Student Award.
My sincerest thanks to the members of the 2021 EDI Awards Adjudication Committee for selecting me for this incredible award. I was surprised and delighted to learn of my selection for this honor, considering all of the accomplishments of the University of Calgary students over the last year. This has been an unprecedented time for movement towards anti-racist mentality, and our students and alumni have led so much of this action. I'm so proud to be among them. Addressing systemic racism is not just about conversations, it's about changing and creating policies that confront inequity and enhance potential. I would be remiss to accept this award without expressing my gratitude for my team, Bethlehem Teste and David Estilabo, who have embodied the African proverb, if you want to go far, go together. My advice to students is to not let others define what potential or success is. Diversity explains that we have differences, and inclusion celebrates it. So let people celebrate you in all your glory. Thank you to U of C, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and especially the Faculty of Law for continuing to celebrate its students.
Congratulations again, Keisha, on your student award. It's my honor now to introduce the faculty award. The 2021 EDI Faculty Award goes to Dr. William Bridle, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology. William has been conducting qualitative research on the LGBTQ+ population related to sport inclusion since his PhD. He sits on the LGBTQI2S+ Sport Inclusion Task Force Coordinating Committee and was the recipient of the Calgary Institute for the Humanities Fellowship, where he further investigates the experience of LGBTQ+ in sport. William is also the co-lead of the Faculty of Kinesiology EDI Committee. He has worked with sport organizations such as Skate Canada to offer his perspective as a socio-cultural scholar on how to create an environment cultivated through anti-racist practices and the dismissal of homophobia and transphobia. He teaches 3 courses where students are required to critically reflect on their privilege and taken for granted knowledge on society and sport. William uses his platform to create an inclusive, diverse, and equitable environment within the Faculty of Kinesiology and in Sport Canada. Congratulations, Dr. William Bridle, winner of this year's EDI Faculty Award.
I'm really honored to receive this award. I know many undergrad students, grad students, postdocs, faculty, and staff are doing really important work in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and their work inspires me. I am very grateful to have amazing partners in the community who I learn from on a daily basis, really. And I just pledge really from here on in to continue to work in the spirit of accomplishment on equity, diversity, and inclusion on campus and in the community. Thanks to the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Awards Committee for this, incredible award. It's gorgeous and it really means so much to me. So thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Bridle. The winner of this year's EDI Staff Award is Renee Huntley. As the Indigenous Health Program Coordinator, Renee coordinates and maintains the day-to-day operations of various initiatives within the Indigenous Health portfolio of the Indigenous Local and Global Health Office at the Cummings School of Medicine. This past year, Renee has continually demonstrated resourceful ingenuity during the pandemic. She was responsible for moving weekly Indigenous wellness circles to an online platform and coordinating virtual information sessions. Her work continued with panel discussions to share in advance the work that began with the Indigenous Health Dialogue by hosting Indigenous Lunch and Learn sessions. Despite the move to primarily online remote learning, students continue to connect with each other and with the community through these programs. Students have commented about how these programs help them navigate through medical school, provide teaching beyond the regular academic program, contribute to wellness, and allow them to maintain a sense of belonging and connection to the community. Congratulations, Renee, the recipient of the 2021 EDI Staff Award.
Thank you so much for this incredible award. I just feel so honored to get to live and work on Treaty 7 land in Mohkinstsis, doing something that I absolutely love to do. But I'd like to thank the members of the Adjudication Committee and the Indigenous Local and Global Health Office team for this nomination and for your support. I'm thankful for my mentors and those who continue to inspire me. To Dr. Lindsay Croshoe for your vision and dedication to the Indigenous Health Program, and to all of the wonderful students who have participated in our initiatives over the years. We honestly could not run this program without you. During this past year especially, I feel grateful for the connections that I've made. The love and guidance of our traditional knowledge keepers uplifts me and inspires me to keep striving to make the Cummings School of Medicine an inclusive and welcoming place for all learners. So thank you all.
Congratulations, Renee. Now I would like to take this opportunity to announce the team award. This year's EDI award goes to the Calgary Black Medical Student Association. And their members include Aya Abdallah, Jadara Nara, McNeil Ing Anali Kari, Marcel Muhammad. This summer, the students of the Calgary Black Medical Student Association released their calls to action to address institutionalized racism in medical education and healthcare. Their thoughtful, evidence-based framework to guide anti-racist action within the medical school included calls to increase representation within medicine of BIPOC students, equip all medical students to care for BIPOC patients, and to promote wellness among BIPOC students. The courage and grace of these students in leading change has left a profound imprint on all those who work with them. Their efforts have resulted in a number of changes in policy and process to the Cummings School of Medicine's anti-racist strategy. In many cases, members of the student team shared their own personal experiences of racism to help leaders better understand the need for changes they sought. These students are brave EDI leaders, worthy of being celebrated for their advocacy to make our university a more inclusive place. Congratulations, Aya Abdallah, Jadari Anwar, McNeil Ing Ani Kadi, and Marcel Muhammad. Congratulations on your award.
On behalf of the Black Medical Students Association 2020, we would like to thank the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity for this award, given in recognition of our efforts to combat systemic racism within the Cummings School of Medicine. Last year, when we witnessed the brutal murder of George Floyd, we were shocked. We could not believe what was happening to people who look like us and our families. And these events are ultimately what compelled us to release our calls to action to Cummings School of Medicine, outlining tangible changes that the Cummings School of Medicine can take to begin their journey towards an anti-racist future in medicine. Now the question is, what does an EDI award really mean? In life, we often recognize people for many accomplishments, such as academic achievements, artistic abilities, athletic abilities, and so on. But rarely do we recognize those who are fighting to improve the lives of people who are downtrodden or who have been historically excluded. This EDI award recognizes those who stand up for what is right, which is diversity, equity, and inclusivity. We could not have achieved this without our many mentors, including Drs. Scantlebury, Johnson, and Osisutu, nor without our BMSA advisors, Drs. Kashra, Rabi, Kassam, and Brown. We would also like to thank our many friends and family for their unwavering support. Most importantly, we would like to thank Drs. Waldron Affleck and Fatum Saeed for founding the BMSA and creating a safe space for Black medical students. Finally, with this award, we hope that faculty and those that come after us can carry on towards continuing the University of Calgary's journey towards an anti-racist future. Thank you.
Congratulations again to all our 2021 winners, and thank you, President McCauley and Provost Marshall, for your commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion here at the University of Calgary. You are, by your leadership, are fostering an inclusive culture where all voices are encouraged to bring their ideas forward as we create a truly forward-thinking, bold, and visionary institution. We have much to do, and equitable, diverse, and inclusive leadership are indispensable to our institution's success. To our winners today, the work you do to create new programs, training opportunities, and opportunities to explore inclusion throughout our campus community, that work is making a difference. You are a difference. Many of you have shared your personal experiences of racism, or homophobia, or anti-Indigenous racism, as you spoke through truth to power, carrying an emotional burden to help make the changes needed to ease the burden, not just for yourselves, but for others. We all need to continue to strive to break down barriers and to increase access to education for all. Your efforts are transforming our campus, our community as a whole. Congratulations, and thank you for all you have done, and I'm sure all you will continue to do for the University of Calgary, with the University of Calgary and the broader society. And now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the EDI Week 2021, the theme of which is racial justice in a time of COVID-19. And we are honored to have Dr. Verna St. Denis deliver that keynote. Dr. St. Denis is a highly accomplished scholar whose expertise on anti-racism and anti-racist education is sought out nationally and internationally. A professor in Educational Foundation, she graduated with her B.Ed with distinction from the University of Saskatchewan in 1982, earned her PhD from Stanford University in 2002, and has been a faculty member at the University of Saskatchewan's College of Education since 1992. A member of the Beauties and Okamasas First Nation, Dr. St. Denis is both Cree and Métis. She grew up as a non-status Indian and Métis in Parkland, Saskatchewan. Today, Dr. Denis' keynote is entitled An Indigenous Journey with Anti-Racist Education. She will share with us how anti-racist education is as necessary now as it has ever been, and how racism against Indigenous people in Canada has inspired her scholarly work and journey. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Verna St. Denis.
Thank you, Malinda. And good afternoon. And thank you, Elder Shu, for the prayers with which we began this journey. Indeed, I would like to share with you in the next few minutes my journey with anti-racist education. Racism against Indigenous people in Canada has inspired my scholarly engagement with critical, integrative, anti-racist analysis. In teaching, research, and community engagement, Indigenous, critical race, feminist, and anti-colonial scholarship has provided a compass for navigating an ever-shifting racism. I am sharing my knowledge and experience as a Treaty First Nations and Métis from the Treaty 6 area and homeland of the Métis in Saskatchewan. It is true that I grew up on the borders of 3 communities: the First Nations people, relatives of my mother, living on reserve lands, and then my father and his relatives who both lived on road allowance and hamlets of Métis communities. And then thirdly, settler pioneer communities and hamlets. And so I draw on my knowledge and research as a professor of equity studies in Indigenous teacher education, as well as teaching in a primarily white teacher education program. As a new faculty, as Dr. Smith mentioned, in 1992, I was asked to develop and teach the first equity studies course, mandatory for all teacher education at the University of Saskatchewan. But long before that, I came to the university as a young Cree and Métis woman in the spring of 1978 via affirmative action programming or education equity programming, and in my case, the Indian Teacher Education Program. As I look back on that time, I realized that we as Indigenous people were allowed into the university through the back door, so to speak, because the university had not been an open, inviting, and supportive place for Indigenous people. And by back door, I mean programming such as the Indigenous Law Program, which after 50 years has recently been discontinued, or the Indian Social Work Program, or the Native Access Nursing Program, which also has been discontinued. We were promised that these faculties would do better to support Indigenous student success in these colleges, and yet I and others continue to be called into conversations with faculty and students to address racism within these professions and their lack of responsiveness to racism in healthcare, the law, child welfare, and on and on and on. And so as I reflect on the university as a place of learning and knowledge production and mobilization, I see that there is yet much to be done, and the social inequality that we witness on a daily basis suggests that so much more can change and different kind of change needs to happen. In fact, if universities are to truly be places of open dialogue and promotion of knowledge, then the university must acknowledge its past as well as the present harms that are perpetrated as we envision a better future. If universities are truly to be responsive to the public, then the diversity of that public must be acknowledged and respected. Not only must doors open, but more importantly, the foundation must shift towards the diverse perspectives and voices that constitute our nation and our communities. It's not enough that we participate in the university system, but we must together change the university, who it's been for and what it does and how it does what it does. In other words, the research and knowledge it produces and promotes must be reflective of and responsive to the diverse communities that make a university, and acknowledge that maintaining the status quo perpetuates harm. As Indigenous scholars, many of them, and I'm going to refer to Sandra Grande, has argued, the academy has been an effective apparatus of colonization. Universities have not stood apart from the church, government, in undermining the sovereignty of Indigenous people, and has not stood apart from the logic of genocide and dispossession of Indigenous people. When I came to the university in the late 1970s, I joined a small group of Indigenous students on the campus to lobby and advocate for the establishment of Indigenous Studies Department. We refused to sit in status quo history, psychology, anthropology, sociology, English classes. We simply could not passively accept colonial knowledge that produced Indigenous people as uncivilized savages without a history, without a purpose of life, without a philosophy of life. We appealed to open-minded faculties from these departments. We advocated at the President's office, and together we built one of the first Indigenous Studies departments in the country. Indigenous studies and First Nations education have led the way, but they cannot continue to travel that road alone. It's unfair and unjust that faculties in those departments carry the bulk of the load in decolonizing the university. Those Indigenous departments and programs and that faculty have provided a tremendous service, and the service they provide and the knowledge they have produced is often too minimally appreciated, and yet their reach has been far. They alone have carried the weight of decolonizing other disciplines, such as geography, political science, history, English, kinesiology, agriculture, and the sciences. In fact, I would argue that the presence of Indigenous studies and Indigenous faculty have raised the standards in other disciplines and raised the profile of the university. But that reach and that effect cannot be limited to a few pockets here and there. The Indian Teacher Education Program was another empowering marginalized university space that was important in my intellectual growth and understanding, particularly the role that educational foundations played in that development, which is of continuing importance. Critical pedagogy, which examines the structures of power and oppression. In particular, I identified with and I built upon the analysis of class inequality and connections to global inequality through the colonial and imperial exploitation of labor and resource extraction. I learned about apartheid in South Africa and the Bantustans, which were a reservation type homeland for Black South Africans and set up by white dominated South African government. Learning about the way that white South Africans could use a reserve system to exclude Black South Africans from the political system was terribly enlightening, considering the pass and permit system that was also established here in Canada and enforced by police and Indian agents until the 1940s, and likely informally into the 60s, and perhaps even now. I have been inspired by some of the early Indigenous scholars, thinkers, and authors like Howard Adams, who wrote Prison of Grass, Canada, A Native Point of View. Another Indigenous author and activist who was particularly influential, Harold Cardinal, and his book On Just Society, as well as his second book, The Rebirth of Canada's Indians, as well as Maria Campbell's Half-Breed, were all important in politicizing my understanding of the need and purpose of a liberating education. And so I embarked upon my graduation with my Bachelor of Education to make a difference in the lives of those who have been unjustly treated, who have been prevented and resented for dreaming of a better life. I was just 20 years old when I read Howard Adams, who declared in his Prison of Grass, a metaphor for reservations, that, and I quote from his 1977 book, "As soon as Native children enter school, they are surrounded with white supremacist ideas and stories. Every image glorifies white success. They soon recognize that all positions of authority, such as teacher, priest, judge, Indian agent, are held by whites," end of quote. This declaration of the consequences of colonialism and racism challenged the deeply embedded assumption that only settlers were capable of such positions of authority and privilege. But even more, Howard Adams challenged and questioned those institutions in which such agents were deployed to maintain a system of racialized inequality. Institutions like education, Christianity, justice system, policing, and the political system. Towards the end of his book, Howard Adams makes a further statement to which I have returned time and again. As we, Indigenous faculty and faculty of color, are often compelled to convince our white identified colleagues, students, that racism in Canada is real, and the disparity in quality of life between those racialized as Black and Brown is in fact the consequence of colonial and white settler racism. Howard Adams declares, and I quote again from him, Indians and Métis have the feeling that everyone should know that racism is obvious and blatant, and to ask them to document racism is an insult because racism surrounds them constantly. And this he was writing about in 1977. And yet today we remain distracted by the demand to provide proof, despite the evidence all around of the shameful treatment of Indigenous people and people of color. After all of these years in the academy, I see a real limitation in graduate programming. I see a need for graduate programs to take seriously Indigenous and diverse perspectives because they produce the next generation of faculty. There's such a desperate need for anti-racist education. And certainly Black scholars, scholars of color, ethnic studies scholars, feminists of color scholars, anti-colonial scholars have all produced an enormous body of critical race scholarship. And without that scholarship, I could not teach. We can't relegate that scholarship to a few spaces within the academy. That scholarship needs to be made available much more widely than currently exists. That scholarship was so important in my own graduate education, both at the master's level and the PhD levels, and is central to my teaching. Over the last 30 years, over 30 years ago, I became interested in diverse perspectives on the question of whether feminism as a body of analysis and program for change was relevant or not to women of color and Indigenous women. And so I embarked on gathering and reading scholarship at that time by primarily women of color. You know, the classics, Audre Lorde, Gloria Anzaldúa, Angela Davis, and of course, Bell Hooks. Collections like This Bridge Called My Back, or All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave. These were some of the original texts that just really inspired me. In these authors, I recognized and identified with the analysis of the systems and practices of racialized, gendered, class inequality that they offered. These scholars further contributed and refined my understanding of racialized and the white supremacist system we navigate then and now. So for example, reading such ideas as offered in Bell Hooks' Loving Blackness as Political Resistance, Eating the Other, Representations of Whiteness in the Black Imagination. You know, as Hooks explains, she was in search of the debris of history. And the common experience that, again, I quote from Bell Hooks, all Black people in the United States live with the possibility that they will be terrorized by whiteness. And of course, I continue to draw upon the insight of the next generation of feminist scholars of color. But we as many have attested to, we produce that knowledge at an extra cost. And so despite decades of such compelling scholarship, we still ignore that large body of anti-colonial, anti-racist education that is widely available. I see a real lack of anti-racist education, particularly in colleges of education, and the consequences are profound. We continue to turn out teachers ill-prepared to teach for an anti-racist society. When we fail to do this education in the university, those of us who practice anti-racist education, we end up running ragged trying to provide that education out in the professions or the institutions after the fact. Indigenous and non-Indigenous newcomers need Indigenous knowledge and anti-racist analysis to be represented in the faculty and the curriculum. Students need it, and students actually want it. And what I mean by anti-racist education includes examining historical and current practices of racialization. So for example, we need to understand the relationship between colonialism and race thinking. As anti-colonial scholar Frantz Fanon, writing 70, 80 years ago, has argued, quote, "The settler owes the fact of his existence, that is to say his property, to the colonial system." We need to understand the race concept as a tool that serves as an anchoring point for evaluation and judgments. We need to examine how Christianity, Western science, Western political and economic thought and practice created and then defended a racialized hierarchy of human worth and human value, all of which have social, economic, political, and educational consequences and effects that are not equally distributed. And every day we see the evidence of that on the bodies of brown and Black people. As Ibram Kendi in his book, Stamped from the Beginning states, racist policies drive racist ideas. Economic, political, cultural self-interest lead to racist policies, and then racist hatred and stereotypes are promoted to protect those policies. And so we need to examine how race is employed to not only disadvantage, but more importantly, how it privileges and how it provides advantage for those identified as white. And so therefore, interrogating the practice and performance of whiteness is a necessary and significant intervention in anti-racist education. And many have attested to the reality that people of color experience the wrath of whiteness, whether we choose to be vocal about white racism or not. And there have been scholars who've written about this. And definitely we who research and teach for an anti-racist society must contend with that reality, that we engage in what scholars have stated is unrecognized, uncompensated, emotionally taxing epistemic labor. Recently, I've been reading scholars who write, as does Nora Bernstein, on epistemic injustice, which she defines as, quote, any injustice that harms someone specifically in their capacity as a knower. And part of the way this epistemic injustice is accomplished, as Bernstein explains, is through testimonial injustice, or through what Applebaum, I think, refers to as default skeptical responses, which occurs when a speaker receives less credibility, questioned, disbelieved as a result of negative identity prejudice. Or as Barbara Applebaum explains, through a process of gaslighting, when white people use, as she explains, when white people use distancing strategies to deny what people of color tell them. So many scholars have discussed ignorance and how ignorance works to silence and erase. And really, this idea of ignorance is more importantly understood as a state, as I came across these two scholars, Garrett and Siegel, who explain that the state of ignorance is often mobilized in response to bothersome, troubling, destabilizing, or worrying knowledge. And so that's a different kind of educational problem that we who teach for change encounter. And others like Fellman have defined ignorance as an active dynamic of negation, an active refusal of knowledge. And perhaps this will change in the future as we talk about and move towards thinking about making universities more diverse. And so I think as part of that, Applebaum talks about the importance of valuing epistemic friction. That is theories of knowing and how we know have the potential, because diverse knowledge systems have the potential to make visible the ways that dominant frameworks erase the credibility of alternative frameworks for explaining the social world. And so I think that's what we as Indigenous scholars and scholars of color contribute to the university. And all of this in my, and other scholars have written about the need for humility. Applebaum concludes, that we need humility, we need curiosity, we need diligence, and we need open-mindedness. And I would conclude that these are all human qualities that we all need. If indeed we want to live in a more socially just world, and really there is more than enough resources in this world for all of us, to live a life of dignity where our basic human needs are met, including the right to food, shelter, and clothing, and the opportunity to engage in meaningful relationships. And this, I believe, is what our scholarship offers as a way forward. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Denis, for that brave, courageous, thoughtful, engaging, and always forward thinking keynote address, which is so necessary for this moment. I'd also like to thank Dr. Reg Croshew for starting us out in a good way to have these kinds of conversations during this award ceremony. In many ways, the pandemic has brought to light that which we already knew existed. The inequities that have been permeating our societies for some time. Racism exists in our communities. Populations are targeted by virtue of their race or indigenous status or religion or disability, gender identity and gender expression, as well as sexual orientation or religious diversity. It happens all the time, and we are naming it in order to address it. We all needed to call out interpersonal and intercultural racism when we see it, and the epistemic violence that results from racism. To challenge our institutions and institutional equities that continue to oppress, yes, oppress, and disadvantage some and privilege others. Breaking down barriers, as the winners of these awards have pointed out, and as our keynote has highlighted, breaking down barriers are necessary because they sustain injustice. It's not easy. It will be met with resistance, but it must be done. And we are all going to be needed to make that happen together. The University of Calgary has made a commitment to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. We are having courageous conversations that are needed to bring to light to what has been hidden in the shadows, to challenge our beliefs and make space for those who have fought so hard to be heard. But conversations, courageous though they may be, are not enough. We must also ask the difficult questions, rethink policies, change systems, and redesign structures. The winners of today's EDI Awards, the leadership team at the university, my office, and inspiring speakers like Dr. St. Denis, we all share the need to make systemic and measurable change for the better. I ask you, those on these virtually, to do your part, to educate yourself about anti-racism, about what it means to be an anti-racist, to further equity, diversity, inclusion. Yes, to take part in EDI weeks, Black History Month events, to explore resource pages, speak to those who have been most impacted, and be in solidarity, but also in complicity, mindful that this is all our struggle. Be proactive in working to combat racism, racial discrimination, and above all, to advance racial justice. Let me end by saying this. There is a fierce urgency of now, to paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King. This is our time. This is our moment, and together we can and we must make the change this world needs. I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank all of our award winners. I want to thank Dr. Verna St. Denis, and I want to thank the president and the provost for taking time to be here. Have a good EDI week and Black History Month. Thank you all.